Hey everyone, thanks again for joining us today. This is Adam Hops from the National Operations Center of Excellence. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is a new webinar series from us, the Road Weather Spotlight series that'll be running through October. Thank you so much to FHWA's Road Weather Management Program, Tony Coventry in particular, for bringing us this webinar series. The first one looking at Hurricane Ida and the effects from several different states. Before we get started, just a few reminders. Everybody will be muted throughout the webinars today. If you have questions, please feel free to use the chat pod. Please feel free to use the chat pod if you have any sort of technical issues. We are going to do a Q&A, so the Q&A box up on your screen is available for questions for the presenters. We'll moderate those at the end. So two different ways to get a hold of us: chat pod if there's a technical issue or a broader question. You'll see us put links in that chat pod as well, and then questions for presenters, use that Q&A box. For those who've been using NOCO webinars quite a bit, you'll notice we're here on Zoom. We're slowly moving over our webinar program to Zoom through the summer. A couple of reasons: we want to make sure that we use some new features such as closed captioning, which is available on your screen. If you don't see it come up, you should be able to go to the bottom of your screen or top of your controls and hit live transcript or closed caption to have access to those. And then some new video webinar facilitation features that we'll be rolling out through the year as well. So I appreciate everybody's patience in moving over to the Zoom room for this. All right, Tony, thank you again for bringing us this webinar series, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Adam. And before I get started, I just want to say thanks to Adam and actually the NOCO team for helping facilitate doing this webinar series that we're starting at the Road Weather Management Program. So to get us started, the next slide, Adam. The idea behind the monthly webinar series from the Road Weather Management Program is to basically spotlight specific things in the road weather community that are relevant at the time. So current events for the road weather community. And I just want to make sure you know, Adam, we're looking at your browser and not the slides in case you weren't aware. But the idea behind the webinar series is that each month we're going to do a webinar with guests about a specific subject. So if you look at the little box on the right, the upcoming topics, we're going to build topics in these sort of areas. One, like today, severe weather and resilience kind of events, and then road weather maintenance and operations challenges. And just to kind of give you a precursor to what's coming next month, it'll be in that category. And we're looking to discuss sort of the impacts labor has on operations now. So kind of look for that coming up. And then other topic areas will be road weather data and sources and applications. And this is sort of the data we use as operations and some of the applications those data feed as part of our operations as well. And then finally, the other topic area will be road weather research and innovations. And this will be about technologies and specific solutions that might have come out that are also useful for road weather operations going forward. So keep an eye on those things. And if you haven't been to the NOCO website, you can go to that website and you can sign up and they'll put you on the list, and then you'll get an actual email about each of the upcoming webinars and when they are, and the links to sign up for them. There's also other parts of the agencies that use NOCO. So if you're interested in, for example, traffic incident management or TISMO type things, they have webinars from those groups as well. So you can get those alerts about the webinars and the meetings and the information they're using as well. So it's a good resource for the Federal Highway right now to do some of these webinars. So our plan is to do this webinar the first Wednesday of each month. So you can kind of, the idea, and mark it off on your calendar, know there's going to be something interesting at that time. And then again, the idea is to sort of highlight, current events that are relative to what's happening in the road weather community now and our operations, and sort of look for, things we learned from different events, as well as try to identify practical solutions that could be deployed. So that's the idea behind it. This is the first in a mini series. We started off with May through October, but we'll continue it as we have subjects and material that we want to get out to the community. So that's the idea behind the series. So the next slide. So today we're going to put a spotlight on Hurricane Ida and the impact that it had on the transportation network. And sometimes when we think of hurricanes, we just think about how they're going to impact the Gulf Coast as they're making landfall. But Hurricane Ida actually was a different severe storm that went all the way up the coast and impacted a lot of different states in different ways. And so we're going to talk about that today. And so this is a really good list of speakers that we have. David from Louisiana DOT is going to talk about how the storm impacted their transportation network as it came ashore. And then Chris from New Jersey and Dan from PennDOT will talk about how it impacted them as the remnants of the hurricane moved farther north. In addition, we also have Roham from the National Weather Service, which many of you probably know, as he is our sort of liaison for the Pathfinder program. And he's going to give an overview of how the Weather Service provides the information to different DOTs and their operations during severe weather events, the different agencies, how they work with local. And then we'll have a quick discussion about, is there an opportunity of how do we partner a little bit better with those services together? And then, for these types of events and going forward, and maybe can we take Pathfinder from not just being a winter weather solution, but to be a severe weather solution as well. So we'll have a roundtable with all of these guys after they give a quick explanation of what happened to them during Hurricane Ida. Go ahead, next slide. So I kind of just already went over this, but this is the idea. We'll have a 5 to 10 minute presentation from each of those state DOTs and their impact. Then I'll have Roham from the National Weather Service give an update on how they responded to the event and how they interacted with those DOTs. And then we'll have, again, a facilitated discussion. So before we get started, we wanted to kind of do a quick poll to kind of get you guys engaged in what we're talking about. And so these are a couple of questions that will pop up for you to answer at this time. We'll just take a minute to answer those questions, if you don't mind.
We'll leave this one open for a second. Just a reminder, everybody, you can move this poll around on your screen if we want to continue with the presentation. I can leave it open for a moment or more.
Yeah, that'd be great. While you're answering that, I'll go and I want to give sort of an overview of what happened with Hurricane Ida. Basically, this happened at the end of August when the hurricane made landfall. There was this hurricane changed quickly as it moved through the Gulf, and the Hurricane Center had to kind of adapt quickly to those changes in that hurricane in terms of its intensity and how it was going to impact the Gulf Coast as it made landfall. So, and then it actually impacted 70% of Louisiana's population before moving into the tropical storm, or some called it the remnants of the hurricane as it moved. You can see the path in the map that the hurricane took, crossed all those different states, significantly impacted Pennsylvania and the East Coast, New York. I'm sure many of you heard about the flooding that happened there. There was a tremendous amount of rainfall that caught them off guard in New York, where the subways were flooded and many people's basement homes were flooded, and a lot of impact from flooding. This storm kind of kept going and had a lot of moisture involved with it that impacted that. And just to let you know, many of you might have already saw that they actually retired the hurricane named Ida, which happens when a storm is severe enough that we don't want to use it again. So the Hurricane Ida name has actually been retired by the National Weather Service. And just to let you also know that there's a current evaluation going on, assessment of the National Weather Service is doing an assessment of this hurricane and some of the things that they were forecasting and reacted. And they actually are working with the DOT on that assessment. So what was the impact to the DOT? And I know that Ro's going to talk a little bit about impact decision support when we get to him, but that assessment should be coming out at the end of I think the end of the summer. It's scheduled to kind of get released, and they're working on that now to put that together to, what are some best practices, what are the things we learned from this particular storm. So keep an eye out for that. And then as you guys saw, well, some of the big impacts weren't just the tornadoes and the wind and the destruction, but the flooding was a big part of this hurricane as it rolled through the eastern side of the United States. So that's an update. And I think did we get David on where he can come on and kind of give an update?
I am on. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Perfect. Thank you, David, for joining. So David's going to introduce himself and give a kind of how this storm impacted Louisiana as it made landfall.
Okay, so I'm David Miller. I'm the Chief Maintenance Engineer for the state of Louisiana, which I've been there almost a little over 35 years. And so I have a lot of maintenance responsibilities throughout the whole state, and including handling the every issue that comes in with emergency response and hurricanes. And we were hoping that since we had 5 or 6 events the prior year, that the last year would have been a calm year, but it wasn't. So we had Hurricane Ida, and like was described earlier, it was a very bad storm, and it did a lot of damage. So some of the things that I'll cover is the planning and preparation part of what we do. We know that outside of our levee systems in the south part of our state, that there's roadways that are going to become inundated with a hurricane of this size, and that certainly happened. Part of what we do also is we prepare for evacuations and contraflow, which is where we turn some of our interstate system into all outbound out of the state, and that requires coordination with Mississippi. We almost did contraflow for Hurricane Ida, but did not. And part of the reason is because there's timelines and some criteria that has to be met to do the contraflow. Two main things is that there has to be a mandatory evacuation of the New Orleans area, and it's typically got to be a Cat 3 or higher. And on storms that pop up quickly, a lot of times we don't have time to do contraflow because our busing operations, where we're evacuating folks out, have to be done before contraflow can begin, because we don't want all the buses getting caught in the traffic mess. So we came close. We were within a half hour of pulling the trigger, and we didn't this year. But we was closest we've come since Katrina to actually doing it. Response and recovery contracts were in place. We did bring in some outside help. We had a lot of, so 70% of our population lives in the Baton Rouge, New Orleans area, and that's the largest area that got impacted. And so we had a lot of signs and signal damage. And so we typically, as other states do, we bring in resources from around our state to help with the emergency response. We were able to contact PennDOT and have them come in and help backfill some of those daily activities that were occurring in districts that were not affected. And they were a great help there. And so we definitely appreciate they were willing to volunteer to help. So the recovery and clearing of roads is obviously the first thing that we do. Nobody can get anywhere until roads are cleared. So we brought in resources from around the state to do that. And I have a couple of slides I'll show you in a minute that show just some basic pictures of what we've got to deal with when those happen. We had a major debris operation going on for many months. It just ended actually last month, and picking up just debris from all the storm, wind damage, water damage, all the above. And so we always do after action reviews. There's multi-tiered approaches to where we do them at a district level, and a state level, then a multi-agency level, and go over what we can do best. So on the right side of the screen, you see these lessons learned here. We learned from the previous year that having a centrally located base camp, when we have an event that's large, where we're bringing in hundreds and hundreds of people to help assist in recovery, that we've got to have a place with them for them to be close enough to go drive in and drive out on a daily basis and have all the support functions that go with that. So again, like I said here, we leverage partnerships. Big thing with the signals is not just getting the signals up and running, but the timing and the detection is equally important in some locations. And so we had some lessons learned there with some contracts we put out. And we also learned too with the getting signals back up and powered up that light plants work a lot better than generators. For one, people didn't seem to steal them as often, and they last about 3 times longer because the tanks are bigger. So let's roll to the next slide, and I'll got a few pictures that we can show. So this is an inside of our base camp at a location called Lamar Dixon, where they hold rodeos and large events. And we basically rented one of their large buildings and set up folks. And you can see, we had meals for them. We had meals for them to take on the road, and breakfast, and then supper in the evening. So that worked out really well. And we would definitely be looking to do something like that again if there was a large event. Next slide. So again, this is probably where we spent the most money on recovery, is in the debris side of things. There's some bunch of numbers up here, but just to point out that we spent over nearly a little bit over 100 million in picking up debris, and 11,500 shoulder miles were cleared. And of course, you understand that this is multiple passes. This is not just coming through one time in an area, but you're coming through 2, 3, maybe even 4 times. And we had 98 crews, and a crew is basically the pickup truck, a truck that's picking up the material, and then the debris truck itself. So that's what would constitute a crew. Next slide. Yeah, so this is what we're dealing with, especially the left picture would be one of our coastal areas still underwater, a lot of sand and debris on the roads that has to get cleared. And on the right, you just see a typical debris operation picking up mostly vegetative material. The next slide. And last thing would be I would discuss is we had significant busing operations to help people evacuate, and then move folks to shelters later on, and move them around after the shelters begin to close down. We spent around 15 million on that. You can see that we had about 185 coach buses and 24 paratransits that were assisting us in this. And this is a contract that we bid out in advance, both the debris contract and the busing. Next slide is my last slide. Just some picture of some of the busing operations. They're a pretty significant undertaking, and we always have to have the paratransits for folks that need additional assistance. And I don't know how long I went, but that does it for me.
That was great, David. Thank you for that update. And if you have questions specifically for David, just put them in the question answer. We'll come back to there. I have some of my own questions relative to the whole contraflow decision, how you made that. So we'll come back to that, and then we'll switch over right away to PennDOT and let them talk a little bit.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dan Wetzel. I'm the Section Chief for Emergency Incident Management for Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. I oversee our statewide coordination of emergency response for all of Department of Transportation needs. So when Hurricane Ida was coming up through, we kind of have a process within our Commonwealth that we coordinate. We have a coordination call amongst not only ourselves, but the Pennsylvania State Police, the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission, as well as the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency. So we do a coordination call prior to the event happening to get the latest weather forecast from one of our contracted weather services and see where the main impact is going to be and what we can expect from that. Upon completion of that, if there's needs, then we move equipment and manpower around the state from the less impacted areas to the ones that are going to be impacted. With this event, we didn't move anyone prior to the event, but we did do some pre-storm precautions. So we had some areas that we knew that there was some debris under bridges, like trees already. So they went out and cleared them to try to keep water flowing better, and did some pre-measures, as well as pre-setting barricades for where they knew flood-prone areas were, so they could close roads rapidly once they did flood, or they would close the roads prior to it flooding if they knew it was going to flood. So those are a couple of the things we did. We do have a pretty vast roadway network system for the public to see. We utilize our 511 PA to notify the public of closures and closure points, and that's all through our it's called an RCRS system, our road conditions reporting system, and we utilize that to signify where any closures were or any restrictions that we may have put in. We did not implement any restrictions with this. We typically only implement them with the winds and with heavy snows or ice. When Ida came through Pennsylvania, we didn't see the high enough winds to implement any commercial vehicle restrictions on our end. But we do utilize a dashboard in our command system to see to monitor our closures, so we can see where the impacts are happening the most. Once Ida came through, we did move some crews around from less impacted areas to come down and help with debris removal, helping rebuild some shoulders, and do some emergency work from the less impacted areas of the Commonwealth. And they worked down there for about 2 weeks prior to us kind of cutting them loose back to their home crews. And then we also send management teams around to assist the impacted districts with the items needed for disaster recovery. So documentations and things like that needs to go along with getting reimbursements in the long run. So we did send a couple of management teams around as well to help with the districts. Our major impacted area was our District 6 area, which is our Philadelphia region. That was our highest impacted area. On when Ida came through, the Schuylkill River that runs through Philadelphia, I decided it did not want to be where it was any longer, and decided it wanted to become part of our interstate system. In Philadelphia, Interstate 676, which is also known as Vine Street, runs right through Center City and underneath. It's sublevel. It filled up with water. And in the next slides, we'll show you that it put 30 million gallons of water into on our interstate. So here in this slide here, that is Interstate 676 in the middle. That is not supposed to be water, as it was that day. So we had to come up with how are we going to get rid of 30 million gallons of water? Well, the first part is we had to wait for the river to go back into its banks. And once that happened, then we could start pumping that water out. So 676 does have a pump station. And I believe in one of our slides, it does show that the pump station that's there was actually underwater. So here's where the pump station is for your normal day-to-day rains. And obviously it was out of service at that point because it was too flooded. So we had to come up with a solution on how can we move a massive amount of water quickly. So the typical pumps that we have for Department of Transportation, we calculated out that it would take nearly 21 to 27 days to pump that much water out. And then that's just the volume of water that we had. And we're talking 5,000 gallon per minute pumps that we were going to be trying to utilize. And that still wasn't, it was still going to take 21 to 27 days to clear out. So we worked through our command structure and we found a Marcellus shale company that moves a lot of water, and we contacted them, and we were able to use a private contractor through Marcellus shale to bring a pump out that they utilize for pumping operations. So I believe the next slide may show that pumping operation. Nope. No, that's just, there it is. So here's our pumping operation that we had. They brought out multiple pumps and were able to pump out the 30 million gallons of water back into the Schuylkill River in a matter of a day, day and a half. And when doing so, obviously with the flood, it brought in debris with that. So they were able to, they worked with our maintenance forces in the District 6 region, in the Philadelphia region there. And as they were pumping the water out, they were assisting us with pressure washing and clearing the road as it was coming down. And they would just move the pumps with us as we kept clearing the road. So that way we could open this road in a much more timely manner. But it was working through our resources and different coordination like that to help us through. And here's just another view of how large this pumping system was. This contractor was located out of Harrisburg, PA, or Hershey, Pennsylvania. And they were able to be on site within a few hours from us making initial phone calls to being on site. We had never worked with this contractor before. They had never worked with the Commonwealth before. This was the first time they'd ever worked with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So there was hurdles there of paperwork and insurance, stuff like that, that we had to go through, but the contractor mobilized immediately and was on site. They were pumping, I want to say they were pumping within 12 hours of the initial phone call. They had a pump set up and already started pumping water within 12 hours of the initial phone call. And I believe that it will wrap up the PennDOT part of IDA here. And like they said, if you have any questions, please use that Q&A box and I'll be happy to help you with it.
All right. Thanks, Dan. That was really good. And it's kind of scary when you see an entire road underwater like that. But yeah, and again, as Dan mentioned, if you have questions for him specifically, put it in the Q&A and we'll get to him when we get to the panel discussion. And so now I guess I'll hand it over to Chris to give a update on how it impacted New Jersey DOT.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Feinthel, Senior Director of Operations here with New Jersey Department of Transportation. And I think much like Louisiana and Pennsylvania, you know, it was a lot of preparedness going into this, but we certainly got maybe more than we bargained for, or the storm came in a lot stronger and more intense than we had, you know, anticipated when we were to start. So my chief responsibility here in New Jersey is I oversee winter operations, snow and ice control. That's very much morphed in the past 5 years to what I'd call weather operations. We average about 50 weather events a year. You go back to a 10, 15, 20-year look back, 48, 49 of those 50 would have just been snow and ice control. But in the last 5 years, we have seen a noticeable and a very large shift where we're averaging now about 6 flooding events over the summer months and then leaking into September, where we're dealing with flooding issues before our winter season even starts. So it's kind of an odd thing. It's changed, and we're looking into maybe changing the way we number our events. But most of my winter events now are starting at event 7, even event 8. So this Ida storm for us was actually event 4. We had a couple other significant flooding events in July and August of last year. We fell right into our weather preparedness reactionary mode, kind of as we prepared for it. So the one benefit I'd say New Jersey had was, and I think it was on one of the earlier maps that Tony showed prior, was New Jersey and New York were going to be the last 2 states to experience Ida. You know, the exit point into the Atlantic Ocean was basically New York City as it came across New Jersey. So we were prepared and kind of saw what we were in for, and we knew it would be significant as we moved into it. So With that and said, we activated statewide at a level 1 activation for us, which would be the lowest for snow, but it's basically would be a flooding posture where we opened all of our emergency response centers. So we have 4 of those, a statewide one, and then each region, north, central, and south. We actually opened at 12 noon prior to the storm coming in. So about 5 hours prior to when we anticipated Ida to hit New Jersey. That allowed us to be prepared for what we expected to be a large and maybe too cumbersome of amount of calls to our central dispatch unit that services the whole state. So we were able to slice it 3 ways there amongst the regions and handle the calls a little more efficiently and effectively. And prior to it, we cleared inlets, we pre-positioned equipment like New Jersey and Pennsylvania mentioned. One thing I will note, same as Louisiana, we had the contraflow conversation, much like Dave said in Louisiana. The window for that is often upwards of 72 hours prior here for New Jersey. So as much as we thought about it, and it ended up not being appropriate for a couple of regions, just because our contraflow plan is for the Jersey Shore, and the Jersey Shore primarily wasn't hit as hard as the west coast of New Jersey was in the Delaware River area. But also just the timing did not sync up. By the time we started having that conversation, we were outside of our window to realistically pull off a contraflow. So the stars didn't align for us there. And some of the things we did do was the open dialogue with our neighboring states, especially Pennsylvania, as we saw that it was going to hit Pennsylvania first, and we had a little bit of a 12-hour lead to see what was reacting, how Pennsylvania was reacting and how it was going to hit New Jersey. We did take a lot of pre-position efforts, especially with, we've really upped our generator capacity for all of our intersections. So all of our signalized intersections, I should say. So we had a lot of our equipment pre-positioned and we just kind of effectively and smartly had it all out there ready for it. We did activate our 511 NJ Connect system. And then a big after action item for us after Superstorm Sandy was adding emergency response provisions into all of our maintenance contracts. So really any maintenance contract that I put out, and they're on an annual cycle that help us with in-kind infrastructure repair, they have emergency provisions within it. We use these, if there's an infrastructure emergency, but we also can tap into some sort of weather emergency for us. And that proved to be very valuable as we had a lot of infrastructure failure throughout and afterwards with Tropical Storm Ida. The other thing I would say is new to our snow, we put this in about 2 years ago with our winter readiness packages, were partnerships through state police with various towing contractors throughout New Jersey. And as the storm hit and in the aftermath, the towing contractors actually ended up being some of the busiest vendors for us. Interstate 287 had 387 cars stranded on it the next morning. Interstate 78 had over 200 cars stranded. And then a lot of the auxiliary routes, more of your highways that are going through townships and municipalities. There were cars everywhere that we had to at least get to the shoulder, work with local and state police to move them, at least get them safely off the roadway so we could start to go to work ourselves. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we were prepared for a major storm. What we weren't prepared for was how quickly and how intense things came in. The predicted forecast, and I went back and looked at it again, was 6 inches over 12 hours, which certainly would be a major storm for New Jersey. We ended up getting 11 inches in about 6 hours. So the dynamic flipped on us. More rain in less time. Some of the peak spots, Newark Airport got 3.5 inches, so even runways were flooded at Newark Airport, which, they're designed for that to never happen, but it came in at such an intensity that we certainly couldn't keep up. We have 42 locations that required an emergency infrastructure repair, with several locations needing a complete redesign and a rebuild of the existing infrastructure. I can proudly say 41 of those have been completed, and we're in the final stretch of the final infrastructure repair of having that on Route 22 in the Bridgewater area, which is central New Jersey. That's almost in its completion stage. Overarching, what I'd say for New Jersey on the infrastructure side was Ida exposed everywhere that we were vulnerable. A big area of concern that I still have and that we're working through is the corrugated metal pipe. New Jersey put a lot of it in the 70s and 80s, and there wasn't not faulting anyone, but there wasn't a good plan of how to extract it and how to replace it when it hit the end of its life cycle. Knock on wood, a lot of that pipe has far exceeded what the normal life cycle should be. But as we're starting to get more of these major rain events in New Jersey, it's proving to be an area that we're certainly, it's a threat, and it's an area that we are vulnerable. The other thing I would say is with this storm is we actually had a EF3 tornado that hit into New Jersey, which is highly unusual, especially in my career where we're having a tornado hit. So that actually came before the heavy rain. I don't want to say it took our eye off the rain, but it certainly put a lot of our focus into southern New Jersey. That's where the Mullica Hill area is before the heavy rains came. So it almost became like a 1-2 punch for Ida. We started dealing with the tornado where some homes were destroyed. There were trees everywhere, a lot of debris cleanup and a lot of leftover work from that. And then we moved into a lot of the heavy flooding. Next slide, please. In the my top left corner, you'll see there is, that's one of the spots. It's a huge sinkhole up near MetLife Stadium where the Giants and Jets play, only about a mile from there on Route 46 at the Route 3 interchange there. I didn't put the photo in, I'm kicking myself, but believe it or not, there was a Jeep Wrangler inside of that hole. So just to give you an idea of how large it was one of those large corrugated metal pipes that collapsed. Below that is a sound wall that fell onto an apartment building, which obviously created its own health, safety, and would say even humanitarian emergency that we at the DOT were asked to kind of be the first responders on to get out there and assist with. On my right-hand side is just a taste of what some of the pavement issues looked like. You know, it was kind of, the next morning when it was safe and we all started going out, it was, we couldn't believe just some of the rubble and the destruction that was in the wake of the flood as it started to recede. Next slide, please. Just kind of more look of some of the pavement conditions. These are various places across the state highway system. We had infrastructure repairs or infrastructure emergencies that were spread across 10 of our counties and 13 different state highways that had infrastructure emergencies. I am proud to say that all of our highways were open, all the interstates were open within 12 hours of the storm. The interstate system really held strong in that regard. Our biggest issue was towing all of the abandoned vehicles off of it, like I mentioned, and state police were a great partner for us. And then we had the entire system open, at least one lane on each highway within 48 hours. And then the next slide. One thing I wanted to touch on in New Jersey specifically, but I'm sure our state partners deal with this all the time, is after an event like this, a big part of my role and the statewide team is the maybe competing requests and the different municipalities or different entities that are looking for help, and how do we manage that? You know, we have our OEM resource request process, and we don't want to say no to anyone, but we're certainly trying to help and trying to prioritize the work and being as efficient and effective as we can. On the left, you see that's actually the entrance to Rutgers Stadium. Their home opener was the night after Ida. There was a want to have the game played. A kind of that we just got to a realistic point, and it became a goal. Well, could the game be played on a Saturday, which was about 48 hours after the storm had left New Jersey? And we were successful in having all the roads into Rutgers cleaned up and open and ready for that. On the right is the Somerset Patriots Stadium. They're a AA affiliate of the Yankees, and they're actually positioned between Interstate 287 and our State Route 28. So just an idea of the amount of water, that was sitting there, literally, that was up into the stands, really kind of, you could barely see the outfield fence, but that's how much water had collected between the two state highways here in New Jersey. Like I said, it was, what I think we did really well was proactively activating. I don't want to say we had a head start, but we certainly worked quite flat-footed. We had all of our assets out. We had all of our staff in, which certainly helps. Through the thick of the storm, there was no mobility in the state, so it's not like the maintenance folks were able to get out there, but they were at least there with our equipment and ready to go once the water started to recede, that we didn't have to, have people coming out of their homes and having them travel to go get their equipment. So that certainly helps.
Yeah.
That's it for me.
All right, thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Yeah, 11 inches of rain in a short period of time. There's nothing you can do about that. That's going to be a disaster one way or the other. So, but speaking of which, so now quickly I want to switch over to Ro to give an update on National Weather Service and sort of the role they play in this event and these kinds of events. Thanks, Ro.
All right, thank you, Tony. Well, there's some great presentations there that you saw from the DOT side, and really from the Weather Service, what we look at, and I'm gonna kind of funnel from the larger National Weather Service response to these types of events and everyday operations, and then get down to what I feel is more pertinent to this group and for our mission in general here, which is the kind of Pathfinder and IDSS angle that the Weather Service is taking. So, for a storm like Ida, and really for all events, including tornadoes that are tornado type days that occur during this time of year, all the way to flooding events and really any type of event, we have a set of national centers like the Hurricane Center, the Storm Prediction Center, the Aviation Weather Center, and the Hydrometeorological Prediction Center that sort of give the overall guidance to our field structure. And they'll put out major watch warning event scenarios for synoptic level storms. So, something bigger than the series of thunderstorms that's occurring over one particular area. So in a case like with Ida, we have coordination kind of, let's say, originating from a place like the National Hurricane Center. And then we have our field office structure, which is the map you see in the upper left-hand side. And those are the people with which it's most important for you as the DOT to be in touch with and to have a good relationship with. We've got 122 of them across the country, and certainly in some states and some areas, you may have to coordinate with more than one. Now, when it comes to a large setup, like let's say if you're talking about a state headquarters, DOT, traffic management center, you may want, especially if you have to coordinate with several offices, you may want to go more to our regional operations center rock structure that you see in the bottom right. And that is, they kind of bring together all of the WFO information from a larger area and condense it during an event like Ida, where you're going to have where you don't want to have to deal with several different offices as the storm is moving, for example. You may want to just contact one and have them kind of wrap everything up for you. So next slide, please. So that's the kind of foundation of our IDSS from the National Weather Service. We have, from the left-hand side there of the timeline, we originate with our graphical forecasts, social media posts, things like that. And as we go further along the IDSS structure, we're further tailoring that to the needs of the individual office level. Okay, so we'll have webinars, we'll have conference calls, NWS chat. A lot of offices have a kind of a briefing package that they put out every day. And then when it goes even more specific than that, we're talking about having a one-on-one kind of coordination set up, like in a traffic operations center during a very intense event. So next slide, please. So that brings it to Pathfinder, and Pathfinder, that's my #1 job here at the Weather Service, is to go around the country and to get the National Weather Service, the DOT, and the private sector support together in each individual state, and to first off, to get everyone to meet. You're much more likely to be able to respond to an event effectively if you know the person that you're dealing with, rather than have to scramble and get that information on the fly. So these meetings have been extremely successful, because really what we're all aiming to do with all of our careers here, whether you're the Weather Service, the DOT, or you're an emergency manager, we're just trying to save life and property. So, you know, these folks tend to get along very well. We tend to have, when you get down to a specific area, we have specific needs that are common to an area that we can speak to at these meetings, and to try to facilitate a better relationship between the DOT and the National Weather Service, so that you can share your concerns and be able to get to a more, you know, consistent basis of communication and an exchange of information. That way we find that we're best suited as an entire governmental response when we work from a solid footing, from a pre-established relationship, where, you know, where we're not waiting for a big event to happen to get to the point where the DOT is learning about this great product we have, or, you know, this service we could provide, or vice versa. We want that work to be done well ahead of time, and the relationships to be strong, such that you're able to work very closely with a person who is able to serve you. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Tony.
All right, thanks, Joe. I really appreciate the kind of give that understanding of the role that the National Weather Service, and even some of the states have private sector weather services, and how they interact during these kinds of events. And so we do have a few minutes now to kind of have sort of a discussion, some questions. And I think I'm going to start with you, David. There was one and I think you've already answered it from Kathy about, you know, was most of the debris that you guys were cleaning up, which was a lot, you know, was it just debris from the actual environmental debris from the storm, or was it actually people putting stuff out there on the side of the road for you to pick up?
Yeah, so it was both, obviously, but the majority of it was, and usually with a wind event, it's mostly a vegetative event, but with 140 mile an hour plus winds, we had a lot of significant home damage, and so homes, roofs were gone, and so then, you know, the inside flooded from the rain, and so you end up with a wind and a flood sort of event. And so by far the majority of what we picked up was we call it C&D, construction and demolition debris.
Yeah. Yeah, I that was a lot that you had, and I just, you know, so, you know, I was down in New Orleans last month, and you still drive by and there's an overturned capsized boat in the middle of the woods somewhere, you know, so there's still a lot out there when those things happen. But yeah,
I still have damage to my house right now.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. It takes a while to get all of that out there. So okay, and then another question came in about Pathfinder, and, you know, the potential to expand, you know, this to be more just for severe event, to include severe events, not just for winter weather. So how do you think, Ro? Is that something that you would do? Like, we could set up to make sure that communication is matching up before these times of events? We would do the same thing, have a meeting ahead of it type thing?
Oh, absolutely. And that's a great question. I'm very glad to field it. I think we put way too much of an emphasis on snow, personally. I mean, certainly snow operations are very important, but in general, a snow operation is something that you have 3 to 5 days generally, you know, unless you're talking about some of these big I-70 type events or whatnot, but you have lead time, you have a lot of coordination, and they're generally not the large killers that a more medium type or you know, a flooding situation type storm is. So personally, I would like to go much more towards, and you know, especially considering the type of events we're seeing more and more of, more towards, you know, looking at flooding and severe weather as the kind of, you know, primary thing that we talk about and do. Not to leave the snow behind, it's certainly important, but I think the snow operations are fairly well taken care of by this point, but we're lacking a lot in the severe weather portion. And a lot of that is because it's much harder to respond to an event like that. But that doesn't mean there isn't significant expertise in that area. Most, you know, people in WFOs will be able to tell you where flooding generally occurs, as the DOT also knows very well where those areas are. And you may be surprised how many different people there are already looking at these types of situations and how coordination can be enhanced so that people don't continue to, you know, kind of, you don't continue to see the same impacts in the same areas that we see over and over again. So yes, I think that is very important and a great point.
Okay. And then I guess I have a question for you, similar to you, Dan. You showed in your presentation that as an organization, you met ahead of the event, sort of to pre-plan. Was the National Weather Service like involved in that? Were they part of that meeting and sort of determining what's the impact going to be? Do we lose Dan? We might have lost Dan. So maybe I'll flip the question to you, Chris, then. Did you guys meet ahead of time with the National Weather Service, sort of planning out what that messaging would be?
We did not, but to Rohan's point, I am a fan and maybe a fanatic of the Mount Holly office's daily briefing. So my team gets those every morning because I pull them every morning and send them. But maybe that's a takeaway for me. If there's an opportunity for these major events, the once a year type events, of a conversation as well. So no, we usually rely, and our commissioner very much appreciates the briefing packages every morning. And we discuss them as a leadership team here.
Okay, good. So, well, I was actually hoping for a little bit more time of discussion in these webinars. So maybe next time we'll figure out a way to either make it 90 minutes, we can get a little more into it, or you know, cut down. I'm not sure, but I really like the discussion part of sort of understanding what the solutions are. I want to almost have a phase 2 of what do we do next? You know, what's the next things that we do to kind of solve these things going forward? But we are running out of time, so I just want to say thank you to all the presenters today for giving a presentation on the impact that particular event had to you. And then just a couple of announcements, as I mentioned when we kicked off, that the Spotlight series is going to be every month, and you can actually go on to the NOCO website where the link is there. You can sign up and get an email on those events. You can actually sign up for the next event. And then I put some links to some fact sheets that we have done in the past that are relevant to Pathfinder and how we use Pathfinder to collaborate with the National Weather Service from the DOT and the National Weather perspective in terms of messaging to the public at the same time. So, and then also there's one on there we're working on, a fact sheet for Arizona's Pathfinder project they're working on. It's not necessarily, it's more of a winter warning collaboration, but that's coming out as well. And then finally, there is actually a Hurricane Ida fact sheet we're working on, and it's going through the process of being approved, and we'll put out some information on that fact sheet as well. So look for those things coming out of Federal Highway in the next couple of months. And then finally, I think that I just wanted to put this information up there. These were, again, thank you guys all for coming out and presenting at this webinar. If anybody has any questions or would like to have a discussion, I've talked to them all. They're all willing to, have a conversation with you going forward and give you any other information that you have. Again, thank you for jumping on to the initial, program for the webinar series, spotlight series, and hopefully the next one we'll see you at the next one. And I'll turn it over to you, Adam, in case you had some last minute announcements you needed to make.
Thanks so much, Tony. Thank you to everybody for joining us. We will have the registration up for the next one shortly. You'll get a follow-up email with the recording of this to share with your colleagues and how to register for the next webinar, or sign up for the newsletter there in the chat box to receive all the information, up-to-date information. Thank you again to all of our speakers and to Tony and all of our organizers. Have a great day.